welcome again. We will begin with Jela Krečič. I will just read her bio briefly and we will go on with the presentation. So Jela is a Slovene journalist, columnist and philosopher. She writes for the largest national newspaper, Delo, and her theoretical research focuses on films, TV series, the star system and aesthetics, and she has published several studies on these topics. She also co-edited anthologies on contemporary TV series and on the comedies of Ernst Lubitsch, and has published numerous essays on contemporary art, including an article on the Slovene artistic group NSK for the publication Neue Slowenische Kunst, an event of the final decade of Yugoslavia, and an article on the Janez Janšas for the publication name Ready Made. And recently she also co-edited a volume of political theory, The Final Countdown, Europe, Refugees and the Left. Her literary debut, None Like Her, has been translated into English. So, Jela.
Thank you. Hello. Thank you very much for having me here. I'm so glad to be here in such a good company. So today I think my task is to present shortly my text in this great new book on Janez Janšas, and I will start. So the crucial concept I struggled with was the concept of authorship, since I believe it is the concept that is sort of reigning today's contemporary art field. And I think that Janez Janša's project as being focused or centered around name and name change and author's name reflects this fact. Not only reflects it, but it also develops it and carries it further. Dealing with authorship, I found that Michel Foucault's text, What is an Author, is still very enlightening. So I tried in my text in the book to develop his vision of author function through some projects of Janez Janšas. So I will focus on some of Foucault's main ideas and try to connect them to some of Janez Janša's projects. Foucault, for example, claims that in contrast to proper name, author's name is interwoven with a set of texts and works. So the meaning of the work changes if we discover, for example, that a certain author did not exist, or that someone else wrote a book that was attributed to another author. Furthermore, the author's name serves as means of classification. A name can group together a number of texts and thus differentiate them from others. This is the case also with visual and other artworks, I believe. So the project of the three Janšas already on this level brings about several problems. The first thing that I think requires our attention is the fact that the author's name in their work belongs to three persons or three artists. The serialization of their name and authors adds to ambiguity to their artworks, to their author function. And consequently to the functioning of the artistic system as such. So first of all, the three artists created vast opuses under different names, so their names which were given to them at birth. One of the consequences of their name change was that they had to prove themselves all over again and sort of build their author's name anew, which I think proved to be an impossible task. But not only that, I think that important thing to point out is that three Janez Janšas work on their separate fields even today. For example, one Janša is a media artist and a producer, the other Janša is a director and a performer and also an editor, and the third Janša, who also goes by as Jela Krečič, still works as a visual artist. So what I'm trying to point out is that the use of the same name in different fields of art, but in a place that is so small as is Slovenia, and I think even international art scene, causes further confusion. It constantly raises the question of which author did a certain work, and this demands at least a certain degree of reflection about the art field itself, or art discourse, as Foucault would call it. So the multiplicity of the same name, which belonged to different authors, produces some confusion also when it comes to the legal and copyright aspects. So which work does belong to whom, who is entitled to, I don't know, money, and so on. So these aspects, the aspect of the art market, I think is the very important element of functioning of the art system itself. So author's name in the case of Janšas doesn't reduce ambiguity, but rather enhances it. And these preliminary remarks show how author's name is linked to what Foucault calls author's function. I already mentioned the art market, the functioning of the copyright system and so on, which is, as Foucault says, one of the important aspects of author function. Another characteristic of it is connected with how we attribute authorship. And the elements of these are, I don't know, quality, conceptual and theoretical coherence of work, stylistic uniformity. So the author therefore functions as stabilizing or tranquilizing element that resolves any disparities in the discourse. As I pointed out, there are some difficulties ascribing authorship in case of Janšas, and not only because there are three artists creating under the same name, but also because of the nature of their work. They are creating in the realm of conceptual art, and in almost every one of the works they produce together as a team, as three Janšas, the ownership of exhibited objects is always questionable. From the legal documents they exhibited to bank cards or Coca-Cola bottles. At the same time, I think that when they exhibit their passports, IDs, or birth certificates, the status of these objects changes and multiplies as they enter into the art institution. So they are no longer just valid legal documents, they are at the same time, and without losing their legal significance, also works of art. And as the title Name Ready-Made of their first joint exhibition in Graz suggests, these objects, reflecting their name change and functioning of author's name in general, are ready-mades. And not only that, I believe the artists don't use their name as mark of originality or authenticity, but they rather proclaim the name itself as an artwork. So the name is ready-made. We can discern, I believe, in this an ethical gesture, which I call art being produced in the name of the name. Artists themselves are artists themselves as artists, as subjects, become a curious version of Homo sacer. So they are excrements of their own name. It is the name that gets all the spotlight of the show, while the authors could be prosecuted for neglect of their legal documents. In other words, this self-inflicted obliteration results in exposing the artistic subject as a mere leftover of his name. So this I find the most important. With this ethical gesture, where artists are prepared to sacrifice their own well-being and their artistic authorship with all its benefits for the gains their name plays on them, we can see destruction of the probably most important function of the author, according to Foucault, which is to provide at least an illusion that we can interpret the artwork or that we can grasp it and fully understand it. Psychoanalysis perhaps proposes a more accurate concept for this dimension of author's function. We could say that author is a subject that is supposed to provide coherent meaning, if I paraphrase Noam Lacan's description of psychoanalyst, who is a subject that is supposed to know, which means that, psychoanalyst is supposed to provide or at least provides the belief that he can interpret his patient's symptoms. So author's function in relation to its public and critique also creates this illusion of coherent meaning, artistic excellence, and enjoyment, and thereby guarantees the progress of the process of reading, understanding. So the author is an instance of the big other, much like a psychoanalyst, who produces effects of meaning on the basis of certain transference. The author enables certain interpretation, a certain way of consumption of the artwork, or at least guarantees that such apprehension can be achieved, even if we at a given moment don't yet get what the work is about. So Janšas don't grant their work this illusion or this author's promise. They lose their status as the subject that were supposed to enable interpretation of their work. While the authors resonate in their work at the same time remains ambiguous. Instead of enabling interpretation, it seems that it rather opens up a variety of questions, and it doesn't even promise that an interpretation is possible. There are, of course, several examples of this in their work, but I will focus just on one or few. So the one that seems very interesting to me is the one called Signature. It was made in 2010. This work consists of 27 paintings, which were commissioned by the three Janšas, but painted by the artist Viktor Bernik. Each of these pictures depicts the signature Janez Janša in thick acrylic paint, and in this case, each artist's signature becomes an image which is signed in different ways in the bottom right corner. Some of the paintings are signed by one or the three artists, so they're using several combinations of signature. So in these 27 paintings, we encounter 4 different combinations of words, that is, different variations of 4 names and surnames. And I think that this work, rooted in the visual art system, makes visible how we usually take the signature of the author and its effects for granted. It appears self-evident that in the history of art, every painting bears a name, the mark of an author. So what the three Janšas do in this piece, the signature, is a gesture worthy of Duchamp, again. They take a mark of an author and treat it as an artwork itself. What was before only a mark of an author's function is now the artwork itself. To emphasize the role of the author in art and art system, the three artists play with these signatures under the paintings and exercise several variations of authorship. So to further complicate things, the images of the 3 signatures belong to the 3 artists, but the paintings were actually made by Viktor Bernik. So what am I trying to say? I think that this is just one example of how Janšas are sabotaging author's function on every level, and with it also keep disturbing the conditions of functioning of art system itself. And I'm leaving aside here, there are other projects like Trust, All About You, 350 Coca-Cola bottles, in which I think the 3 artists addressed the economic and consumerist side of name and identity. I just want to point out that this part of their opus shows how their work blurs the borders between different art spheres and also between different discourses. I believe that their work constantly evokes a political dimension of a name change and also economic implications of name and identity as such. But I don't have time to go into that. So I will just try to slowly conclude these remarks. What can we say about art that is being produced in the name of the name? On the one hand, we are, as said, dealing with a certain ethical gesture of the authors. They surrender their artistic subjectivity or subjectivities to the realm of one name and its effects. With this willing subordination, the author function also changes. We no longer have an artistic figure of big other, so the subject that was supposed to grant interpretation. We have three interchangeable authors who unmask and destruct this very figure of the author. All of the Janšas activities performed in the name of the name at the end bring us to, I would say, ontological dimension of a name. A name was supposed to denote its bearer. And the problem that haunted philosophy from Plato on was, do names adequately grasp the essence of their bearers? But once a name is turned into a piece of art, it begins to produce various effects on its subjects and on the other. It starts to diminish, to destruct the symbolic universe, so the meaning, the understanding and interpretation. It becomes the real it was supposed to name. The name is the real bearer, constantly disrupting the author function and the way discourses work. A bearer waiting to be named, signified, and accepted into the symbolic field. Thank you. Mm-hmm.